Hello and welcome. We're glad you have joined us. My name is Amit. I'm a Microsoft technical trainer specializing in security and AI. I am here to walk you through the AZ-305 course, Design Infrastructure Solutions. In this session, we are designing governance solutions, basically how you keep control when Azure adoption scales. How to plan for an environment that is manageable, secure, and predictable, even when you have many teams and many workloads. We will cover how to design for governance, design for management groups, design for Azure subscriptions, design for resource groups, for resource tagging, design for Azure policies and role-based access control, and design for Azure landing zones. Let's see how we can ensure we are running the cloud rather than the cloud running us. Pause and think. What is governance and why do we care? Many teams discover governance the hard way in one of three moments. Cost surprises. Why is the bill so high and who owns it? Security drift. Who allowed public access and broad permissions? Operational chaos. Where is the resource? What environment is that? Who cares about governance? Well, not only IT. Security, compliance, finance, operation. Honestly, any team that will get the bill. When do you start with governance? Ideally, early, but better late than never. Adding guardrails after deployment feels a little bit like renovating a house after people already moved in. It's possible, but painful. If we have a user that requests access to deploy cloud resources, well, the IT admin can approve it or deploy on behalf of the user. Or we can streamline the process with governance tools, considering permissions, risk, compliance regulation, budget, and automation. Governance is all about keeping control and visibility on our Azure resources so things don't get out of hand. First, we figure out what is needed. Then, we lay out a plan for how to get there. Next, we decide what matters most, setting our priorities. And most important, make sure these decisions are put into action at every level of our organizational hierarchy. That's how we stay ahead of the chaos and avoid unpleasant surprises. The Azure Resource Manager is built for scoped management, enabling you to control and organize resources at various levels. Under our entry tenant, we have an optional layer called management groups. They help us manage policies, access, and compliance across multiple subscriptions. Subscriptions are the unit of billing, scale, and isolation. Underneath them, we will organize resources in resource groups. Those are the lifecycle containers where resources are deployed and managed. Resources are the services you have deployed, like a function, SQL database, a virtual machine, or a virtual network. First up, design for management groups. Management groups can help you centralize subscription guardrails and isolate workloads. Under our Entra ID tenant, we have a hidden root. Under the root, we can get started with planning for management groups. For the organizational level, Contoso in our case, we can plan for controls like policies, permissions, and budgeting for the entire organization. Those controls are inherited. If we have a centralized IT team that needs full visibility, we can assign it with role-based access control on that level. Then we can bring our organizational structure into Azure via nested management groups. You can have up to 6 layers of nested groups. We will isolate workloads for sales, corporate, IT, HR, and region-based workloads. We can then provide the right access to the right team. The sales groups can have access only to their management group, for example. They get their own subscription to scale freely without interfering other teams. The IT workloads are divided into production and sandbox, so new development will not impact our running environment. Our production might need more than one subscription to scale or for isolation. If we have a team in charge of the workloads in subscription B only, a good idea is to provide access only for the minimum level required on the subscription level rather on the management group. Always use list privileges. We can even move the subscription between management groups to reorganize if changes occur. But plan permissions carefully. If people can freely restructure the hierarchy, they can potentially escape guardrails, so access control matters here. In most real environments, a flat structure wins. Not because deep is wrong, but because deep become hard to reason about. Inheritance, troubleshooting, and who can change what gets messy. The most common organizing strategies that we see are department, geography, or by environment, like production versus non-production. A mistake we have seen, organization build a beautiful 6-level hierarchy. Then nobody remembers where to assign policy, and troubleshooting become archaeology. Now, the core container designed for Azure subscription, the thing that you must have in order to consume Azure. When working with Azure subscriptions, it is important to consider several factors. What are business priorities and needs? For example, isolating our HR systems for protecting sensitive employee data and ensuring compliance with privacy regulations. Which security controllers are needed? A subscription acts as a security boundary by default. What kind of support do we need? In production, we probably need the highest level of support. If something breaks, we need help to fix it as soon as possible. While in my test environment, it might be perfectly fine to get support only during business hours. Where do we work? Subscriptions aren't tied to a specific region. Therefore, you don't need a separated subscription for each region, only if that makes sense in your own environment. Keep in mind, some services might be available only in certain regions. Some regions might have less demand, and you can consume them with lower cost. Isolate your sandbox from running workloads. Many organizations provide per user or per team subscription to experiment with new solutions. Should we centralize administrative effort, or should each team manage its own subscription independently? Do we have other technical considerations like PCI workloads that typically require other policies in order to achieve compliance? A subscription is your billing unit. It is linked to a payment method. Pre-form a regular schedule to review costs and right-size resources for workloads. Consider limits and quotas. One big subscription is simple until it hits limits and no one can scale. Which workloads need to communicate with each other? Consider your network design. While you cannot share virtual networks across subscriptions, connectivity can be achieved across subscriptions. Who can access it? On which level? Consider list privileges. Subscriptions are where finance, security, and engineering finally agree. It's the billing boundary, the security boundary, and a management boundary. Scale is just reality. Subscriptions have limits and quotas, and some workloads grow fast. If we hit the hard limit, we must deploy another subscription to consume more resources. It will be advised to place it under the same management group for centralized control and governance. Centralizing shared services is a good approach. Centralized logging, connectivity, security tooling, so app teams don't need to reinvent the basics. Inform subscription owners of their roles and responsibilities, like full ownership of budget spending and resources. So, when to use subscriptions? Anytime you want to consume Azure resources. We would like to separate subscriptions to isolate and allow scale. This is a specific example of how subscriptions can help us with isolation and management. The Tailwinds organization needs boundaries for IT and corporate, handled by management groups. Then, each department in the corporate needs its own isolated environment, so legal and HR gets a subscription. In IT, they want complete separation for dev and prod. Dev has less requirement that can be handled in a subscription, while their production environment needs support in a large scale, so shared services are centralized in one subscription, and each application gets its own subscription to avoid limit hits. Now we go lower in the hierarchy, designed for resource groups. All resources must live in a resource group. Build a plan that matches your organizational responsibilities. If we have a dedicated team by application, it's best to deploy all the application-related resources in the same resource group by lifecycle. The team can manage the app in one place, allowing them to focus and easily identify dependencies. Furthermore, they can protect it from accidental deletions with locks, or delete the resource group once it's not longer needed and stop paying for the resources. If we have a dedicated network, compute, and databases team, it's best to create resource group by the type or the team, so each group can manage only its relevant resources. Locks are your seatbelts. You don't notice them until the day you almost delete the wrong thing. Understand that they are inherited and only high-privileged roles can remove them, like owner. If you lock your subscription in a read-only mode, no one can do anything inside it. Delete locks allow us changes but not deletions. Next, design for Azure resource tagging. Tags are simply a key-value pair, but it is a great way to bring your own categories to Azure resources, to identify them by your own classifications. They can be business-aligned, like cost center, owner, or project, or IT-aligned, like environment, classification, or operation. We can query them easily in reports, and they appear in the invoice. So we can answer, what am I paying for, and who owns it, with confidence. Configure tag inheritance or enforce them with a policy to assure all projects are labeled. Let me share a real story with you. A cost advisor introduced tagging to a disorganized deployment. In the next invoice, they revealed that some virtual machines were still running for a decommissioned app. They weren't expensive, they were forgotten. Tags made it visible. Now, we continue with design for Azure policies and role-based access control, two key areas for governance. We start with the Azure policy, one of my favorite services for compliance and automation. When we design Azure policy, we want to have a clear definition for our rules. We can use built-in policies, leverage community templates, or build our own. Those will be JSON definitions. Then, the scope. Policies are inherited, so assign them on the highest scope possible to govern centrally, or on a granular scope for specific requirements, like a new project in a resource group that can only be deployed in a single region. The scopes goes from management groups, subscription, to resource groups. Think where the policy is needed. We can locate it on the management group and then use it in all of our subscriptions, for instance. What kind of effect are you looking for? Deny actions, remediate compliance issues, onboard to monitoring solutions? Check out possible effects at Learn. The most popular effects are deny, audit, or deploy if not exist. The last one is great for automation. It will let you go through the deployment without interference and will fix configuration afterwards. For example, a policy to enable Defender for Cloud for servers. It will let us go through our VM deployment, and if we forgot to enable the Defender, it will enable it for us after the deployment, automatically. Super useful for onboarding to security services at scale. When we assign a policy on a management group, let's say policy A, the subscription will inherit it. When we assign policy B on the resource group, both policies are effective in that scope, and both of them will be inherited to the resources. Policy is guardrails for everyone, humans, pipelines, scripts. If it deploys, policy can evaluate it in real time. Every policy is a rule that we can evaluate and enforce, like deploying virtual machines only with a golden image. We can combine policies to initiatives, a group of policy, and assign once for better management. We can rely on internal organizational needs or accommodate with regulatory compliance standards like ISO, EPA, or PCI. With Azure Policy, we get a compliance report that helps us identify and resolve issues faster. If we are looking for remediation guidance for non-compliant resources, we can take the next step and manage compliance with Defender for Cloud. We will have a full assessment, including a step-by-step remediation guide. What is the impact and the risk we are facing if we will not address it? Azure policies and role-based access control solve different problems, but they are working very well together. We will see it soon. Now, for Azure role-based access control. This is how you assign permissions to Azure resources. All authentication requests are first handled by Entra ID. Then, for authorization, we can use the Microsoft Entra roles to manage permissions for the tenant and for Microsoft 365 applications. We will use the Azure role-based access control to govern access to Azure resources. That means that they are independent. We can be the most privileged user in our tenant, like global admin, and have only reader permissions on the subscription. Starting from the root, we can leverage the Azure role-based access control for granular permission management. We can assign privileges on the highest level on the root that will be inherited into every underlying layer, so be mindful. As best practice, we use least privileges, maintain productivity while minimizing risk, like assigning the contributor role only for a single virtual machine. Azure role-based access control has three components: the who, the identity; the what, the definition, the actual permissions; the where, on which scope. Assign roles to groups, not to users. Your future self will thank you. We have roles for all levels of access, including operation-focused roles like backup operator that spans across resources but only for backup. We also have resource-focused roles, like virtual machine contributor, so we can get exactly what we need where we need it. We can create our own custom roles for specific requirements. Permissions are aggregated. To deny actions, remove the high-level assignment and assign a granular role that fits better. Let's see how role-based access control and Azure policies works together. Let's say that we have an Azure admin that would like to go ahead and deploy a cloud resource. First of all, we're verifying its privileges through role-based access control. Does it have deploy permissions? If not, they cannot deploy and they will be denied. If they have the appropriate privileges to deploy the cloud resource, we will move to evaluate the Azure policies. If there is a policy that is restricting the deployment, again, the cloud resource will not be deployed and the user will be denied for deployment. If we do not have a restrictive policy, the user will move forward and deploy the cloud resource. A landing zone is an environment that hosts workload designed for scale and consistency. It's part of the Cloud Adoption Framework ready phase. What it brings? A standardized foundation for governance, security, networking, management, and identity. It offers pre-provisioning through code in a phased and controlled format. To understand the landing zone terminology, the platform landing zone refers to the shared services around identity, connectivity, management, and security. The application landing zones refer to the workloads, the subscription where the app lives, and share the platform resources. The platform landing zone is a shared toolbox. Every new app relies on centralized login, identity, connectivity services instead of rebuilding it. Time to review what we have learned. Let's help Tailwind, a retail company. They have two main business units that handle apparel and sporting goods. Each of the business units consists of 3 departments: the product development, marketing, and sales. Each business unit and subunit will be responsible for tracking their Azure spend. The enterprise IT team will be responsible for providing company-wide Azure cost reporting. Pause and think. What are the different ways Tailwind could organize their subscription and management groups? Which would be the best way to meet their requirements? Let's see an example solution. First of all, we will detail all the units and the subunits under the Tailwinds. Then, we will start with a tenant root group that can be hosted in a management group. Then, for the Tailwind organization, for centralized management for the centralized IT team, we can build it in a management group and enforce governance with policy. For the business units for apparel and sporting goods, each one can get their own subscription with their own rules governed with policies. Underneath the subscriptions, each subunit can be hosted in its own resource group, and we can ensure track of the cost by tagging. Another option that will support a larger scale is define the apparel and sporting goods and management groups. Then, assign dedicated subscription for each subunit. We can later on govern and track the cost with tagging. For the larger scale, security and governance in place, we can plan for Azure landing zones, a dedicated landing zone for each department. Then we can further scale their units and subunits with additional subscriptions. In this session, we'll learn how to design hierarchy with management group, subscription, resource group, and resources. We learned how to design tags so cost and ownerships are visible. We designed for compliance and automation with Azure policies, and designed secure access with role-based access control. Finally, we designed a scalable pattern with Azure landing zones. this concludes our session. There are many ways to continue your learning journey. We encourage you to watch other videos in this course or search out your next favorite topics at Microsoft Learn at aka.ms/learn. I'm Amit Nir. Happy learning.